Rabaul Airfield, New Britain. Lieutenant Commander Saburo Sakai's one good eye skimmed the fresh stack of intelligence reports delivered by a breathless ensign whose uniform still smelled of aviation fuel and the volcanic dust that coated every surface on the island. Rabaul was a hellish crucible steam, mosquitoes, the ever-present hint of sulfur carried in from distant vents, but it was the air that truly defined it. Every pilot stationed here knew the air itself carried death. American raids had become too frequent, too coordinated, too confident. Even so, Sakai chuckled. The Americans, the report claimed, had introduced a new fighter, a successor to the Wildcat. The name struck him as almost comical in its familiarity, the F6F Hellcat. He set the paper down and leaned back in the crude wooden chair. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. A warm breeze drifted through the tent, carrying the sounds of the busy base mechanics hammering on engine panels, sentries calling out, and the roar of a Mitsubishi Sakai engine being tested. Despite the tightening American siege on the Japanese perimeter, the idea of an American fighter surpassing the nimble A6M0 seemed unlikely. Sakai grinned, recalling his battles against Americans over the Philippines, Java, and Guadalcanal. He had seen their planes up close, tough but slow, relying too much on armor and radios, too little on skill and instinct. Their tactics were rigid, their planes heavy and clumsy. He read about the Hellcat, its powerful engine, self-sealing tanks, faster roll, and heavier guns, and scoffed, dismissing it as wishful thinking. Outside, the sun dipped toward the jungle-fringed ridges of Simpson Harbor, casting a humid haze over the airfield. Mechanics rolled out Zero fighters, their camouflaged aluminum skins gleaming. Petty Officer Yoshio Shiga informed Sakai that his A6M5 was ready, fully serviced and armed. Sakai, still feeling the lingering effects of a near-fatal head wound from the previous year, handed Shiga an intelligence sheet detailing the new American fighter. Shiga barely smiled, incredulous at the claim that it could shift the balance of the war. Japanese pilots had every reason to be confident the Zero had ruled the early Pacific skies. Trained rigorously before the war, the pilot's discipline matched the aircraft's nimbleness, allowing aces like Sakai to dominate. Yet beneath their bravado, they sensed a subtle, growing threat. The Americans were adapting and improving. Later, in the pilot's ready tent, Sakai watched a group of young aviators gather around a crude chalkboard where a lieutenant detailed reconnaissance reports. A strike group of American bombers, likely B-25 seconds or B-24 seconds, had been spotted moving up from the southeast. They were accompanied by fighters, probably Wildcats, someone muttered. Or P-38 seconds, another pilot offered. They've been pushing more of them into the Solomons. A junior officer overheard and scoffed. Those two-engine monsters. They're not suited for dogfights. They don't need to dogfight, Sakai interjected. His voice silenced the tent instantly. They fight with climbing attacks, slashing strikes. They refuse to turn with us. That makes them more dangerous, not less. The younger pilots exchanged glances. Some nodded, others looked unconvinced. Sakai had seen enough of the war to know that stubborn confidence would get many of them killed. The lieutenant cleared his throat. Commander, headquarters wants a readiness check. You'll lead the interception should the enemy cross the perimeter. I'll be prepared, Sakai replied. He turned away, but the intelligence report continued to echo in his thoughts. Hellcat. The Americans did have a way of surprising the Japanese at the most inconvenient times. But an aircraft that could rival the Zero? Something that could match its climb, its turn, its agility? He couldn't imagine it. Night fell across the harbour in a sweep of violet shadows. The ocean reflected the last light of day as American long-range reconnaissance aircraft prowled overhead, invisible specks in the dark. Sakai lingered outside the barracks, drinking tea that had long since gone cold. Crickets buzzed. Somewhere beyond the airfield, artillery rumbled where the Japanese army garrison drilled. He replayed, again and again, the intelligence report's claims. More horsepower, better dive speed, superior roll rate. The Zero, for all its brilliance, had limitations. Its lack of armor meant it couldn't sustain heavy fire. Its fuel tanks were dangerously exposed. At high speeds, the controls stiffened, making dives precarious. American pilots had learned to exploit this. They dove away when cornered, using gravity and weight to escape. But if the Americans now had a plane that could not only dive better but climb and fight as well as a Zero? No, he thought again. Impossible. At dawn, the airfield roared awake. Steam rose from the jungle. Fuel trucks rumbled along the flight line. Armorers loaded 20mm cannon rounds in neat rows beside each fighter. Sakai walked toward his aircraft, the familiar silhouette sharp against the brightening sky. His A6M5 looked pristine, deadly, a weapon shaped by years of battlefield refinement. Its wings curved elegantly from the fuselage. Its spinner gleamed. He ran his fingers across the rivets in the skin. Every pilot at Rabaul learned to trust the Zero like a living companion. Shiga approached with a clipboard. Weather is clear. Radar contact indicates inbound aircraft from the southeast. Estimated altitude, 5,000 meters. Enemy composition? Unknown. Possibly fighters ahead of bombers. Sakai nodded. Assemble the flight. Minutes later, 12 Zeros sat lined, along the runway, engines snarling to life. Sakai climbed into his cockpit, adjusting the harness with practiced precision. He slipped on his headset, tested the throttle, checked the fuel gauges. Everything was in order. He lowered the canopy, sealing himself into a world of metal and vibration. Command crackled through his headphones. All fighters, scramble. The first planes shot down the runway, their tails lifting as propellers whipped the morning air. Sakai pushed his throttle forward. His Zero surged, wheels rattling against the volcanic surface until, with a gentle tug of the stick, the aircraft lifted free. The formation climbed sharply, angling southeast toward the reported enemy sighting. Clouds parted around them. The ocean below shimmered like a sheet of hammered steel. Sakai scanned the horizon. Nothing. Then faintly specks appeared against the distant sky. 3 dozen? Perhaps more. Commander, Shiga's voice came through, tense. I see fighters ahead, of the bombers. Sakai narrowed his eye. The fighters formed a loose escort screen. They didn't move like Wildcats. They didn't climb like P-38 seconds. Their silhouettes looked wrong, broad wings, thick fuselages, a sturdiness reminiscent of American engineering, but a vitality he had never seen in their previous designs. He zoomed his gun sight slightly. The fighters grew larger. The sun caught their paint schemes blue, sleek, powerful, Hellcats. So the reports were not exaggerated after all. Sakai felt a ripple of something he hadn't felt in years. Curiosity. Commander? Shiga called again. Orders? Sakai watched one of the American fighters peel off, banking gracefully into an intercept trajectory. A confident, aggressive move. Almost Japanese in spirit. He exhaled. All units, he said calmly. Prepare to engage. The two formations closed distance quickly. American escort fighters fanned out, forming a wide arc. The dive bombers and torpedo planes behind them maintained steady formation, dropping altitude slightly as they headed toward Rabaul's defenses. Sakai dipped his nose, signaling his men to begin their attack run. Do not break formation until ordered, he instructed. We will test this new fighter's capabilities before committing. He descended to gain speed, then leveled off. The Hellcats ahead continued to approach. They looked larger than Wildcats, heavier, but carried themselves with a surprising poise. Their wings were broad, their engines visibly powerful. They did not wobble or struggle for altitude. The first pass came in a blur. A Hellcat dove across Sakai's path, guns blazing in a short, disciplined burst. Tracers streaked past his canopy. Sakai rolled instinctively, feeling the Zero's airframe respond with its typical grace. He expected the American fighter to overshoot or stall. It didn't. The Hellcat tightened its turn. Following him, Sakai felt a flicker of surprise. The Zero was reputed to be unmatched in tight turns. But this new American fighter didn't fall away, it stayed, nipping at the edge of his arc, maintaining pressure with startling stamina. He rolled again, diving sharply. The Hellcat dove with him, accelerating fast, too fast for a Wildcat, far too fast for anything American he'd seen before. Another burst of gunfire ripped past his right wing. Sakai gritted his teeth. This one is different. He pulled back on the stick, climbing, twisting into a climbing spiral. The Zero responded beautifully, its lightweight design carving through the air, but again the Hellcat stayed with him. Not perfectly, not at the Zero's precision, but close enough to prove something alarming. The Americans had built a fighter that didn't break under pressure, a fighter that could take punishment, climb aggressively, dive with authority, and worst of all, turn well enough to threaten even a seasoned Zero pilot. Sakai leveled out, shaking the pursuer. "Shiga," he called. "Report." "I'm engaged," Shiga's stressed voice replied. "Commander, these new fighters, they are fast, and their armor, my shots are bouncing." Sakai snapped his head toward the left, where a distant Hellcat shrugged off cannon fire and kept pushing toward another Zero. He felt the cold grip of realization. This was not a Wildcat, not a derivative, not a stopgap. This was a plane designed specifically to kill Japanese fighters. Sakai's mind raced. America had thrown its enormous industrial power behind an aircraft that combined durability with speed, power with maneuverability. It had none of the fragility of the Zero, none of the predictability of older American designs. The Hellcat flew like a hammer given wings, and he sensed instinctively that this was only the beginning. He tightened his grip on the controls. "Form on me," he called. "We will adapt. We must fight as we always have, disciplined, coordinated, relentless." He turned, back toward the nearest Hellcat, pushing the Zero into a head-on pass. For a moment, two aircraft hurtled toward each other, pilots locked in mutual assessment. Sakai didn't blink. He wanted to know everything about this new enemy. Everything. He dove into combat. And for the first time since the war began, Saburo Sakai felt himself fighting not with confidence but with genuine uncertainty. Dawn light shimmered across the Pacific, scattering gold on the surface as the American strike group pressed north. Beneath their wings lay the charcoal black hull of the USS Enterprise, now a distant speck behind them. The carrier's deck crews had worked through the night, launching bombers and torpedo planes in carefully timed waves before sending up the last piece of the plan. VF6's Hellcat escort group, newly armed, newly trained, and confident in a way that bordered on reckless. Lieutenant Jack Mac Garland eased his stick forward, letting his F6F Hellcat slide into formation, beside his wingman, Ensign David Cruz. The Hellcat still felt new beneath him, the cockpit smell of fresh paint and engine oil, the tight whisper of the Pratt & Whitney R2800, the violence of its raw horsepower, when he opened the throttle even a hair too far. It was a monster compared to the Wildcat he had flown in '42. He'd survived Guadalcanal by luck and a few painfully hard-earned lessons. Now he felt like he finally had a machine capable of matching what the Japanese were flying. Cruz spoke over the radio. "Mac, you're awful quiet today." "Steady," Garland replied. "We're heading toward Rabaul. That place eats pilots if they blink." Cruz laughed nervously. "Guess we'll keep our eyes open then." Garland didn't respond. His jaw tightened as he scanned the sky ahead. The briefings had been blunt. Zero pilots were deadly in close maneuvering fights. American pilots had learned, sometimes fatally, that turning with them was suicidal. The Hellcat changed. That dynamic. It didn't need to be nimbler than the Zero. It only had to survive its first mistake, then climb, dive, use power and altitude, and bring its 6.50 caliber Brownings to bear. He tapped the throttle lightly. The engine growled back. He wasn't afraid. Not today. He was curious. He wanted to meet this myth the Japanese had built in the sky. Sakai leveled his Zero after the first series of maneuvers, lungs burning slightly from the sudden exertion. He had shaken the Hellcat from his tail only through timing and instinct. No American fighter had ever stayed with him that long. Not a Wildcat, not a P-39, not a P-40. This was the first time Sakai had felt the pressure of a machine that refused to yield. Below him, the scattered dogfights flickered like brief, violent storms. Zeros chased and were chased. The Hellcats were everywhere, broad wings, powerful noses, silhouettes unfamiliar yet instantly threatening. "Commander," Shiga's voice cut in, breathless. "2 Hellcats on my tail. I can't shake." Gunfire crackled across the frequency. Sakai spun, scanning the direction of Shiga's last transmission. A pair of Hellcats dove after a lone Zero, cannons chewing the air behind it. The Japanese pilot executed a series of textbook defensive rolls, but Sakai could already see the flaw. The Hellcats weren't losing energy. They stayed fast even as they banked and turned. These Americans were learning. He dove to intercept. The wind screamed along his canopy as he blazed toward the pair. He fired a burst, forcing the lead Hellcat to break off its pursuit. The second American pilot stayed committed, still chasing Shiga. Sakai closed the gap. At this distance he could make out the Hellcat's details. The thick, armoured windshield, the large cowling, the wings that lacked the delicate simplicity of a Zero, but instead promised brute force. This plane was designed with a philosophy opposite his own. Zero pilots were expected to avoid getting hit. Hellcat pilots were expected to survive being hit. The difference was profound. Sakai triggered a burst, sending a streak of 20mm rounds toward the Hellcat's tail. A few tracer impacts sparked, but the American fighter didn't flinch. The bullets had bounced. Sakai's stomach tightened. This was new. "Mac, brake right! Zero coming in on you!" Garland heard Cruz's warning at the same moment. Instinct kicked in. He eased back, pushed into a climbing turn, and felt the Hellcat respond with all its mass and muscle. A Zero flashed past beneath him, sleek, slender, almost weightless. Garland rolled inverted, tracking it. "That one's fast," Cruz muttered. "Really fast." "Fast doesn't matter," Garland replied. "Not if we keep the fight vertical." He pushed the nose down and dove. The Zero pilot snapped upward with startling agility, climbing in a tight spiral impossibly tight. The maneuver stole Garland's breath. No American plane could do that. The Hellcat certainly couldn't not at that radius. But Garland didn't try to follow. He didn't need to. He dove cleanly below the Zero, gaining speed, then pulled up in a powerful zoom climb. The R-2800 engine thundered as the Hellcat surged upward, trading speed for altitude effortlessly. "Come on," he whispered. The Zero appeared again, this time struggling to match his climb. Garland's eyes narrowed. There it was, the opportunity. He rolled smoothly, lined up the shot, and fired. The 50 calories guns roared. Tracers arced toward the Zero, stitching across its left wing. The enemy fighter jerked with the impact, shedding fragments of metal. But even wounded, it avoided the kill shot with a razor-thin roll. Garland exhaled. "They're damn good pilots," he muttered. "Good pilots don't matter," Cruz replied. "Not when you hit 'em with 650s. Garland wasn't so sure. Sakai dove after the Hellcat that had shot at Shiga. The American fighter banked, sharply, climbing with a confidence that surprised him. This pilot was good, very good. His maneuvers lacked the grace of a Japanese ace, but they possessed an almost mathematical logic, a perfect exploitation of the Hellcat's strengths. Sakai recognized the threat immediately. "This one is no novice," he said quietly. He pressed forward, pushing the Zero into a descending spiral to regain advantage. The airframe responded eagerly, but something gnawed at him. Every time he returned to cornering speed, the Hellcat simply powered away, re-engaging on its own terms. This was doctrine, American doctrine. A flying style born of mechanization, training manuals, and test data, not instinct and lifetime discipline like Japan's. He closed again. The Hellcat ahead Garland's plane banked sharply to line up a new diving attack on another Zero. Sakai lunged to intercept. For one brief moment, their planes intersected in a near head-on pass. Sakai saw the American pilot's face, focused, calm, young, but not inexperienced. Their eyes met. Sakai had never forgotten the faces of those rare opponents who earned his respect. This one would join that list. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. Garland leveled out after the near miss. His heart pounded, but not from fear. From exhilaration. "That one," he radioed. "The Zero with the red spinner. He's leading them." Cruz answered. "You think he's one of the aces?" "Feels like it." He didn't know the name Saburo Sakai. Not yet. Pilots on the American carriers knew only rumors of a one-eyed devil who still outflew entire formations. Garland scanned the sky. The Zero reappeared above him, descending in a perfect attack line. "Cruz, he's coming down hard." "I see him. Watch it, Mac." Garland rolled, but the Zero closed too fast. A burst of 20mm tracers slashed past his canopy. Another clipped the Hellcat's wing, punching a fist-sized hole in the metal. "Damn," Garland hissed. The Hellcat shuddered but held. He felt a surge of gratitude for the engineers back home. He dove sharply, the Hellcat screaming downward, gaining speed like a falling boulder. The Zero followed. Cruz tried to intercept, but the Japanese ace ignored him entirely, focusing solely on the wounded Hellcat. Garland felt the weight of the moment. "This man wants me dead." He pulled into a low-level barrel roll, tightening the maneuver. The Hellcat groaned. The Zero matched it with ease. Then Garland snapped upward, using every ounce of the Hellcat's raw climb. The Zero hesitated just for a breath. That was all he needed. He inverted, came down in a high-side guns pass, and fired. Tracers ripped across the Zero's starboard wing. The Japanese pilot rolled away, still in control but wounded. Cruz whooped. "Mac, you hit him! You actually hit him!" "Not enough," Garland said through gritted teeth. "Not for that kind of pilot." The Americans' gunfire shredded the Zero's wing, making the plane shudder violently, a stark warning. Sakai knew his aircraft couldn't withstand much more damage. He steadied the plane. The Hellcat pilot had earned his respect, but that didn't change the truth. He couldn't survive another long encounter with a pack of Hellcats while flying a wounded Zero. "Commander, are you hit?" Shiga called. "Yes," Sakai replied. "But I'm still flying." He banked left, climbing toward the clouds. Below, the battle raged. Zeros spiraled in smoke, pursued relentlessly by Hellcats. Yet the Americans were also taking losses. One Hellcat exploded after a botched maneuver. Another limped toward the sea, trailing fire. It was no longer a one-sided fight. Machine against machine, doctrine against doctrine, pilot against pilot, the balance was shifting. For the first time, Sakai felt it clearly. The Zero's dominance in the Pacific was ending. A new, formidable predator had arrived. Meanwhile, Garland guided his Hellcat back toward Cruz as the battle began to thin. The bombers pressed on toward Rabaul, only partially protected, and VF6 had to stay close. Garland searched for the red spinner Zero, the one he'd almost destroyed, the one that had nearly killed him. It was gone, swallowed by the clouds. He felt no victory. "Whoever he was," he murmured. "He'll be back," Cruz answered. "And we'll be ready." Garland wasn't so certain. The Zero still possessed lethal elegance, piloted by some of the most disciplined, instinctive airmen in the world. The Hellcat, powerful as it was, remained new, and pilots like him were still learning its boundaries. He stared at the empty sky where the Japanese ace had vanished. "We're just getting started," he whispered. Sakai guided his crippled Zero back toward Rabaul. Smoke trailed from the wing. The engine sputtered, but it first held. Below, the base lay shrouded in morning haze, unaware that the balance of air superiority had just shifted. He thought of the Hellcat, its armor, its power, its resilience, its engineer-minded design that forgave mistakes the Zero never would. He exhaled slowly. "This will change everything," he whispered. The war in the air had entered a new phase, and he had lived long enough to witness the dawn of his greatest adversary. The jungle canopy around Rabaul swayed under the midday heat, a shimmering haze rising from the volcanic soil as if the island itself exhaled fatigue. Smoke trails from the morning's engagement still streaked the sky. The battle was over for now, but its implications were only beginning to settle. For the pilots of both nations, the fight had carved itself into memory with a kind of permanence only war could imprint. It was a clash neither side would forget. Sakai sat on an overturned oil drum outside the aviation shack, sweat stinging his damaged eye, a towel draped over his neck. His Zero was barely repairable. The right wing bore structural cracks from Hellcat fire. Mechanics worked tirelessly, welding and bending replacement parts. Shiga approached with barley tea. "Commander, you should rest. Repairs will take hours." Sakai accepted the cup but didn't drink, watching battered Zeros return some limping, one missing its canopy, two never coming back. "These new American fighters, they press the attack," Shiga said. "They have the advantage now," Sakai admitted. "Our planes can't survive what theirs can. It's no longer 1,942. They're producing fighters as fast as we lose them. Today we lost 3 irreplaceable men." Shiga frowned. "Our pilots train for years, theirs for months. And the Hellcat is built for those months," Sakai said, finally sipping the lukewarm tea. For the first time, he realized Japanese pilots no longer held the edge. The sky itself was shifting. The ready room aboard the USS Enterprise buzzed with the chaotic hum of post-mission chatter. Pilots slumped in chairs, some laughing too loudly, the strained kind of laughter born from adrenaline and fear colliding in the bloodstream. Garland sat at a wooden table scattered with mission notebooks, his flight helmet resting beside him. A medic inspected the graze wound on his shoulder from shrapnel during the engagement. Cruz dropped into the seat across from him. "Hell of a scrap, Mac. Didn't think I'd see a Zero get hit and keep flying like that. Those guys are ghosts." "They're not ghosts," Garland said, flexing his shoulder as the medic wrapped gauze. "They're craftsmen. Their pilots have been fighting since before Pearl Harbor." Cruz removed his cap, running a hand through sweat-plastered hair. "Did you see that one with the red spinner? The one diving on you?" Garland's jaw tightened. "Yeah, I saw him. Damn near clipped your wings off." "He was. Good," Garland admitted. "Scary good." The room quieted slightly as their squadron commander, Lieutenant Commander Hal Parker, stepped to the front. His weathered face bore the weight of early war losses few younger pilots could understand. He scanned the room. "You've all just faced Rabaul's best," Parker said. "Most of the pilots you tangled with today are veterans from the early campaigns. They know every trick in the book." Garland felt himself leaning forward unconsciously. "But today," Parker continued, "we proved something. The Hellcat can stand toe-to-toe with the Zero." A murmur rippled across the room. Parker lifted a hand. However, the murmur died instantly. "Don't let that go to your heads. The Zero still turns inside us. Their aces still outfly us in pure maneuvering. Your job is not to fight them their way. Your job is to fight our way." He gestured toward a chalk diagram on the board. Tall, vertical loops, slashing dives, energy, retention models. "We win by climbing, diving, and using the R-2800 to dictate the fight. Don't get cocky. Don't get clever. Keep the fight vertical, and you live." The room nodded. Parker's expression softened slightly. "You all did good today. But don't forget, Rabaul isn't beaten, not even close. Expect more of this." Garland exchanged glances with Cruz. More Zeros, more aces, more duels where fractions of seconds decided life or death. Garland felt the sweat cooling on his neck. The war wasn't shifting because America had a new fighter. It was shifting because both sides were adapting at the same speed. By late afternoon, the sun dipped behind the ridgeline, giving the pilots a brief reprieve from the oppressive heat. Sakai stood beside his Zero as the mechanics lowered the patched wing into place. The repair wasn't perfect. It couldn't be. Rabaul was too far from Japan, too undersupplied, too battered by air raids, but it would fly. For now, the base commander arrived, a stern-faced captain whose uniform bore stains of sweat, ink, and fatigue. "Sakai," he said, "I've sent a full report to command. They need to know what we're facing. This new American fighter must be evaluated at once. Do you believe more will come?" "Yes," Sakai answered instantly. This was only the beginning. The commander frowned. "You're certain?" "Absolutely." Sakai looked toward the horizon where the Americans had vanished. "They've found the machine they needed." He hesitated. "And the pilots to fly it." The commander exhaled through his nose. "Our reinforcements are delayed, fuel shipments are strained, ammunition stockpiles are dwindling, and intelligence says the Americans are massing even more carriers." Sakai remained silent. He already knew. The Japanese Empire was fighting from a shrinking island chain, with longer supply lines and fewer pilots than ever before. Every battle depleted a reservoir. They could no longer refill. And now a fighter existed that could match the Zero's greatest advantages and erase its vulnerabilities. "We will adjust," Sakai said finally. "We must." But inside, he knew adaptation required more than determination. It required machinery Japan could not build fast enough, fuels Japan could not refine fast enough, and men Japan could not train fast enough. "Still," he whispered, mostly to himself, "we fly." Night fell across the carrier. Lantern lights glowed along the Enterprise's narrow passageways, illuminating pilots drifting between exhaustion and restless energy. Garland walked the deck for air, listening to the rhythmic hum of the engines and the distant hiss of waves pushing against steel. The sky above was clear, scattered with stars that looked fragile when hung over so much violence. He found Cruz leaning on the guard railing. "Can't sleep?" Garland asked. "Not after the day we had." Garland nodded. "Same." Cruz stared into the dark horizon. "That Zero you squared off with, he wasn't flying like the others." "No," Garland agreed. "He wasn't. You think he was the one they call the one-eyed ace?" Garland shrugged. "We don't have names for them. But they have names. They know us. They mark us. They study us." Cruz clenched his jaw. "Hellcat or not, it still feels like they're the ones judging us." Garland smirked slightly. "Let 'em judge. We've got the better hammer now." But the words sounded hollow even as he said them. Garland wasn't arrogant. He had seen the Zero dance between tracers like a ghost. He had watched Japanese aces maneuver with a kind of terrifying fluency he could hardly describe. He looked up at the stars. He wondered if that red spinner Zero pilot was doing the same somewhere over Rabaul. In the dim light of the officers' quarters, Sakai knelt on a tatami mat, writing his post-action report with slow, deliberate pen. Strokes. Japanese pilots were taught to write with clarity, as if their words would be scrutinized by the spirits of their ancestors. He detailed everything: the Hellcat's roll rate, its dive acceleration, its startling ability to retain energy after a turn, its armored resilience, its refusal to break formation under fire. He wrote a final note. "The enemy pilot with whom I engaged displayed exceptional awareness and discipline. This suggests their training is improving. If this becomes common, the Hellcat will become more dangerous than any aircraft we have yet faced." He paused, then continued. "The A6M0 remains unmatched in pure turn performance and low-speed handling, but the Hellcat does not seek our strengths. It forces us to fight under its terms. Strategy will decide the future of air combat in the Pacific, not maneuverability." He signed his name, folded the sheet, and set it aside. Outside, the distant roar of American bombers heading toward another target echoed faintly. Sakai closed his eyes. The war pressed closer every day. Garland finally collapsed onto his bunk, drained. He lay back, exhaling slowly as the day's events replayed vividly in his mind: the flash of a Zero streaking across his canopy, the sting of shrapnel, the calm, predatory dive of the red spinner aircraft, and that fleeting, wordless moment when their eyes met. He didn't know the pilot's name, yet he sensed they would meet again. He drifted into uneasy sleep. Far across the ocean, beneath a different moon, Saburo Sakai did the same, each dreaming of the skies they would again share, and the inevitable confrontation that awaited. After midnight, the rain had stopped, but the air remained thick and heavy. Dawn crept over Rabaul in muted grey tones, no dramatic sunlight, only a tired, oppressive morning. Sakai sat alone outside the infirmary tent, a damp bandage on his brow. His flight suit hung open, revealing a lean frame worn thin by long hours in the air, yet his eyes remained sharp and alert. He replayed the previous day's combat over and over, not the maneuvers, not his successes, but that moment of failure, the blue-grey American fighter appearing behind him, a position no Zero pilot should ever allow. Sakai knew the Zero's limits intimately. Its protection was not in armor, but in flawless precision and anticipation. One small mistake could mean death. But this time, the error hadn't come from him. It had come from the aircraft itself. He remembered the Hellcat accelerating effortlessly out of reach, the roar of its engine slicing through the air. The Zero simply could not match it. The distance grew, not because of human error, but because the machine dictated it. Sakai exhaled. Losing to a superior aircraft carried no shame, only the failure to understand it. Commander Sakai, a young ensign, called softly from the shadows. Major Ota is requesting your presence. Sakai rose deliberately, moving with controlled precision. He followed the ensign to the intelligence tent, where maps of Bougainville and the Solomon Sea covered the walls. Officers crowded around a table cluttered with reports, gun camera photographs, and reconnaissance notes from the past weeks. Ota pointed to a magnified image on the board, the F6F Hellcat. We've gathered more intelligence from yesterday's engagement, Ota explained. The Americans are rotating these new fighters into the Solomons quickly. Sakai leaned closer, studying the plane's broad wings, thick fuselage, and powerful engine cowling. It looked heavy and ungainly, yet in the air it moved with devastating authority, like a hammer hurled by a god. What do the analysts say? Sakai asked. They believe this model is designed for high-speed diving attacks and can sustain significant damage. Reports confirm that several Zeros fired full magazines into its engine without downing it. A tense silence filled the tent. Sakai recalled the sunlight glinting off the Hellcat's canopy and the way his rounds had bounced harmlessly away as if the aircraft were forged from something otherworldly. And its maneuverability? He pressed. Moderate, Ota replied. Below 250 knots, the Zero is still superior, but above that, Sakai finished the thought himself. It becomes untouchable. Ota nodded, continuing the briefing, but Sakai barely registered the words. The truth pressed on him, swelling like a bruise. The balance of air combat had shifted. Japan had entered a race it could no longer win. This passage follows Ensign Daniel Harrigan as he reflects on the brutal realities of aerial combat during World War II. Sitting in a briefing room, he recalls the pilots lost before the arrival of the superior Hellcat fighter, understanding that its advanced design forgives mistakes and gives pilots a fighting chance. Harrigan contrasts the Hellcat with the nimble, precise Japanese Zero, recognizing that air superiority depends as much on technology as skill. As new orders for more patrols and combat in the Solomons arrive, he contemplates facing a skilled enemy pilot like Saburo Sakai, not with fear, but with a sense of inevitability, highlighting the clash of warriors drawn into the same deadly sky. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.